Welcome to Season 5 of Learning Unlocked. I'm your host, Britt Bingold. As an instructional specialist in Gilbert, Arizona, I'm a total nerd when it comes to classroom strategies and educational pedagogy. Educators are the key holders to unlocking learning for students. Today, my goal is to provide you with resources and tools, the keys, to enable and accelerate learning for all students. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get started. Before we get going today, I just wanted to do a quick reminder that if you have time to rate us and write us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would appreciate it. The more reviews and ratings we get, the more educators will see and hear our podcast. So if you like what you're hearing and you think others would too, please head over and provide us a review. Thanks. Welcome to episode 43 of Learning Unlocked. Today I am joined by Courtney McIntosh and Jen Reagan, two of our district special education coordinators, to discuss their answers to the most commonly asked questions they get from general education classroom teachers about how to navigate special education. Welcome to the podcast, ladies.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to
Good morning. I'm so thankful to have you on to dig into this really important topic. Before we begin, though, I really want you to introduce yourself to our listeners. So Jen, if you could go first and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your roles in education.
Sure. Well, I've been in education, I did the math, it was 27 years, which is a shock to the system, but it's true. Yeah, as a gen ed teacher, and found that with my husband's moving around in the initial part of our marriage, just with internships and things, I ended up having to get certification in different states. And so I started subbing. Had never even ventured into the world of special ed, but was called to do a special ed assignment. So I thought, okay, I'll try it. And then I was hooked. I loved the interaction with the kids, the interaction with staff. And so then I went back to school to get my special ed certification. Did that in 2 years, did 2 years of SPED teaching in California before moving to Gilbert, where I did 17 more at Canyon Rim, and then have been in this role for, this is my 4th year as the elementary special ed coordinator. So
Awesome. And you're elementary SPED coordinator, right?
Elementary SPED coordinator, yes.
And then Courtney, you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
Sure. So I've been in education since 2011, although it feels much longer considering my mom was a paraprofessional when I was in elementary school myself. So I spent a lot of time within special education classrooms and with special education teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So I started back in 2011. I held a lot of different kinds of teaching positions within special ed, both secondary and elementary, resource and specialized programs. I had the opportunity to move, so I currently live here in Gilbert, but I've worked in other school districts here in Arizona, and I'd worked in Oregon prior to that. I've had some really amazing roles, and I never really saw myself leaving the classroom, but I had an opportunity to move into an instructional coaching role within special education and had some amazing mentors. So shout out to my mentors that helped get me to where I am. So appreciative of their efforts and work. They kind of allowed me to lead in different ways. So I've had a lot of different experiences working with K-12 programs within special ed across all programs, which is kind of crazy in theory, but it was a great experience being able to support all those different kinds of programs and different kinds of needs. And then I jumped into this role here within Gilbert. My husband and I moved here during the pandemic, which is crazy. So we bought a home during the crazy COVID time.
Oh man, that's crazy. Yeah.
Moved to Gilbert, and this position came available, and I thought, okay, well, let's give it a whirl. And so here I am. This is now my 2nd year in this secondary coordinator role, and just loving it. So I love the professionals that I get to work with here in Gilbert.
Awesome. And then can you guys tell the listeners about some of the projects that go on in your office?
Oh gosh, sure. I'll start. It's Jen again. I'm currently involved with our MTSS district committee, working with schools and campuses and refining, learning more about just what that means and how to support students and staff as they determine and figure out what students need for their learning. And then also we're really big into standards-based grading right now, just alignment within all of our programs and how we're communicating information to families. There's lots of little projects, but those are really big ones right now.
MTSS is a big one. What does MTSS stand for, and like really what is it used for in our district?
It's multi-tiered systems of support, and it's a team of people that get together when there are concerns, any kinds of concerns with students, that they just want to make sure that they're really leveraging everything that they have to support students in their access to their learning. So the team members can vary campus to campus, but it's not, a lot of times it can look like a path to special education, but it's really not about that. It's about what supports do we have? What are the different things that we can be doing on our campus to support kids, to give them what they need so they can stay where they are, to stay within the gen ed setting, and to really, because that is always the goal, is for the students to be able to continue their learning within that gen ed setting. And when there's additional supports that are needed, then figuring out what those are and using them.
Awesome. All right. And then Courtney, you have something I saw about a transition fair. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I feel like there's always something going on in our office. There's always some kind of projects happening, but the biggest one that comes to my mind at this point is bringing a transition fair to GPS families and staff. And basically it is to provide information about programs and services that are available to special education students transitioning from high school to adulthood. It will feature many different local agencies and organizations that support furthering education, entering the workforce, housing, transportation, health services, so many different things that I think there are out there that maybe some of our folks just don't know are out there, but a good resource for them.
Yeah, I didn't know about it. And so I was like, oh, that's really cool. I mean, what a great project and resource for those kids and families and people to know about. So awesome. So Jen, what do you do outside of special education work? What's your things that you like to do outside of the day?
Oh gosh, well, I'm a mom, so I enjoy spending time with my family. I just dropped my daughter off at ASU for the first time. She's a freshman there. Oh yeah, so navigating that whole process. It's been good though, and my son is a junior at Gilbert Classical Academy. We do a lot of basketball. Basketball, so he's getting ready to start his season, and it's like a year-long thing, so that's a big one. But we love to go to the beach. We are my husband and I are from California, and so we have family and a lot of friends out there, and we go there when we get those opportunities. And I am an avid reader. Anyone that's knows me.
She's always referencing something from a book, always.
Yeah. So I do that, and I like to run, and believe it or not, I do those simultaneously because most of what I read I listen to.
Same. Mm-hmm.
And I just like to be outside. So when I get opportunity, whether it's the beach or now that it's cooling off, being able to get out and maybe hike or sit outside and not sweat would be fabulous.
For sure.
Coming soon.
It's coming soon. We're almost there. I can feel it. I'm like, okay, it's gonna happen soon. And Courtney, what do you like to do outside of work?
So my husband and I are big sports fans. We spend a ton of time watching college football, NFL football, basketball, baseball. I mean, we're just a huge sports family. So we spend a lot of time not only watching, but going to sporting events. Just, when was it, like a weekend ago or 2 weekends? I went to the University of Arizona and University of Oregon Ducks football game in Tucson.
Fun.
So we love to go and tailgate and be part of that experience. My husband was a student equipment football manager for the University of Oregon Ducks. That's where we met. And he's still very big into all the sports and all things Oregon Ducks. Basically, we're big Duck fans.
Okay.
We also like to just find a good Netflix series to binge watch. I'm pretty big onto that, and maybe some Bravo TV, some reality TV to kind of, just to balance out the day's work. And we're just actually getting prepped for our first baby. So I'm expecting, and we're prepping for our first baby coming in the spring. So
Yay! I'm so excited. I didn't know this. And so when I was looking through all of our interview materials this morning, I was like, oh, so congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're excited.
All right. Well, thank you guys for just like sharing a little bit about yourselves before we really dig in. So I had you kind of like get this collective, what are those burning questions that general ed teachers just have, or you guys get asked a lot? Maybe this is like the FAQ of special education that really like would be helpful for a general classroom education teacher to just know more about. You know, in our teacher prep programs, we go through these classes, we go into IEP or 504 meetings, and sometimes, you know, you're there and you're doing what you can and you're hoping you're doing the right thing, but sometimes you don't know exactly if it is the right thing. But before we get started on those questions that you guys had collected from teachers around the district, can you both provide just a basic understanding about the special education process as a whole?
Yeah, sure. And it's funny, as we were thinking about this question, it's such a loaded question because there is a lot to special education and it can often seem complicated. But where we start is basically the idea of child find. And child find is basically that all public education agencies locate, identify, and evaluate all children with disabilities aged through 21 within their school boundaries. And the purpose of that is to identify those that are in need of early intervention or special education services that we can provide to them.
Okay.
In every campus, when students first enroll, whether that be kindergarten or they're new to the district, everyone has a 45-day screener that most people are familiar with that helps to identify those needs as well. So that's part of that whole process.
I'm just thinking of, you know, next week we have meetings with some of our very, very first year teachers in the afternoon. Several of those have just come out of college, get a stack of these 45-day screeners, and they don't know what to do with them. Can you explain just the importance of them really sitting down and just filling those out to their best of their ability?
Absolutely, because it's the information that they have to be able to speak to whatever those needs might be. And, you know, those can be tricky because they've only just started working with the child. So you don't always have that full breadth of knowledge that you would have after, like, you know, a quarter of working with a student.
Right. Yeah.
You do have 45 days to get that done. So you have a little bit of time, but it is really important that the things that you're noticing that students may be struggling with, whether that be academics or there can be behavioral concerns. It could be
speech,
vision concerns,
social, emotional. Yeah. There's and then I think that a lot of times when teachers are looking at concerns, they're looking mostly at the academic need, which isn't always the case. So we could be looking at sensory processing. We could be looking at behavioral. There are so many different avenues for concerns that, yes, the 45-day screeners usually touch on most of those academic pieces, but it's not just only about the academic piece.
Right. And two, it's also important to note that it's not just about special ed either, because this information is really crucial for looking at anything that might be related to MTSS, what we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Okay.
It can be that stepping stone for those conversations that might happen in trying to figure out how to best meet student needs.
Great. Okay. And then you said there's a lot of ways that the special education process can begin. So what are some of those ways that a teacher maybe identifies something on a 45-day screener, or maybe a kid comes in from a different school, or maybe they're coming in as a kindergartner? How does that process start?
Well, and I think that's the loaded question, right? How does that process start? We're looking at all kinds of avenues when we look at addressing a concern. The concern may come from a teacher, the concern may come from a parent, the concern may also come from a pediatrician, kind of raising those concerns and bringing it forth to the school team. And sometimes that will start the special education evaluation process, but not always does it start that process. We typically look at that MTSS process before we get too deep into that.
Right. Because a lot of times, I mean, it's just like many of us too, like if we get an ailment and there's something going on, there's one of two courses of action. You can either go into like a specialist and go all hard on that, or you can start off at the beginning and try and parse out, okay, what are the things that are maybe health-wise we're trying to remedy that we can deal with, and it's not as big of a thing as we think. We really want to take steps to be able to problem solve, because it's not always as big as we think. Sometimes it is, but you just want to make sure that you're looking at all the different ways that we can meet student needs before you jump to an evaluation for special education, because that does change some trajectory for students, and you just want to make sure we're doing what's best for students.
Okay, so based on where it comes from, whether it is a doctor or a parent, a teacher maybe noticing something, it really is based off, okay, let's slow down, let's collect some data, let's go through, like what you said with the MTSS process and discuss those concerns, and then really determine, okay, is this kid eligible? Is this kid not? What kind of supports need to be in place? Is that what I'm hearing?
So typically you then, once you kind of collect that data, you look at whether or not the student's making progress, and they may determine that the student is making minimal progress or no progress at all. And therefore the team may then decide, okay, we will need to proceed and do a special education evaluation, which then turns into a multidisciplinary team that consists of the parent, the district rep, individual to interpret instructional implications, gen ed teacher, special ed teacher, any related service providers that are needed, such as speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, any of those kind of folks. They meet and they kind of look at, okay, where are all the concerns? Where is the student not making progress? And determine what kinds of assessments we need to continue to gather to determine whether or not they're eligible for special education services.
Okay, awesome. Yes, that makes so much more sense. Okay, that makes sense to my brain. Sorry. I'm like, okay, I'm putting this all together in my head. All right, so I love that you said the beauty of special education, though, is that it is situation and individualized based on the kid, right?
Right. I think that can make it difficult too, though, because it would be nice to know, okay, here's the one way that we do this, and step, here we go. And but it's not like that. It's kind of like a mystery. Like you're trying to find all the different pieces that come together to do what's best for the student. And so sometimes you get some variables in there that you just didn't anticipate, and you have to take into consideration. So.
Absolutely. I mean, my two kids, as an example, my daughter has ADHD and dyslexia, and my son has ADD and dysgraphia. And you would think it would be similar, right, in the processing but they totally present totally differently. Their strengths and weaknesses are completely different areas, and so they're similar-ish in diagnoses, but based on the support they need is totally different.
Right. And in being part of special education for this long, I don't think I've ever had the same situation twice. I think every case, every kid, every meeting, everything in special education, I feel like is different depending on the variables that you get.
So recommendations, though, is, if everything is a little bit different and challenging, it's also, it's great because it's planned for that kid. But it also may be a little overwhelming for a teacher because there's a lot of different things that are going to be happening with a lot of different students. Do you have any, and I know this is not on your list of things, you guys prepped so well, but do you have any recommendations for teachers that do have a lot of students that maybe are needing different things? And then when they go into those meetings, kind of how to prep or what to expect?
Absolutely. I think that first and foremost, don't be an island. So definitely be a collaborative member on a team. So there are so many different resources that you have on a campus: a psychologist, your instructional coach, your special education team, your administrator. There are so many different people that you can gather information from. And what one person might suggest or give feedback on may work not only for that child, but maybe for all of the kids in your classroom. So I think really just being collaborative and reaching out to those folks on your campus for support is absolutely essential.
I would agree with that. And then I would too just be familiar with the process on the campus, because there are systems set up in place on campuses to be able to know who to go to when you have concerns. And so starting with a mentor too, finding out what have we done on this campus, and who do I go to? Who do I talk to? Because you don't have to do it alone. You don't.
Yeah, and it would almost be too much to do alone, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get into the burning questions that you guys have. And this is perfect. What are the similarities and differences between a 504 and an IEP?
All right. Well, there's quite a few similarities, which is what can make it a little bit confusing when trying to know which route to go down. As far as similarities go, they both outline accommodations for the student to be able to access general education learning. Both IEPs and 504s are put in place by the federal government. They're both legal documents. Permission has to be granted by parents in order for children to be on either type of plan like that. They both can serve purposes past high school, so even looking at college, and students receive the services free of charge. They can't be.
Awesome. Okay. And then what are the differences between the two?
And I feel like this is a question we get all the time. I feel like it's just something that we have like on rotation. So,
well, and honestly, I mean, as a classroom teacher, I had this question too for a really long time until I finally sat down and was like, okay, I need to know what these things are.
Right. Absolutely. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, it's a federal civil rights law to stop discrimination against people with disabilities. So that's your law for the 504 piece. When we're looking at students on an IEP, we're dealing with the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which is a federal special education law for children with disabilities. So it's kind of two separate pieces of law that we're looking at for each one.
Okay.
The child must need specialized instruction to make progress in school to have an IEP. So that would mean that they need specially designed instruction to access general education curriculum. Students who can receive a 504 have any perceived disability that impacts them in the general education classroom, whereas there are 13 categories that students would qualify for to be eligible for an IEP.
13?
13.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. So there's so the 504 is any perceived disability. And then, but for an IEP, it seems like it's definitely got way more criteria than 13 pieces.
It does.
Okay.
There are very strict legal requirements for those that have to participate in annual IEP meetings. So every year you have what's called an annual IEP. And that, again, would consist of your parent, student, if they are the age of 16. You've got your district representative. You've got your individual to interpret instructional implications. You've got your gen ed teacher, your special ed teacher, related service providers. So those folks have to be at that meeting. Because everything is really, we always say IEP team decision, which means all of the folks on that team are part of making all of those decisions. Whereas a 504 plan is created by a team of people who are familiar with the child and who understand the evaluation data and special service options. So that could be, usually it's your principal or administrator on the campus, your gen ed teachers, anyone who kind of works with that child and knows the child, the parent. So it's a little bit different as far as like legal requirements of who has to be at those meetings and attend those meetings.
Yeah, so it's not a special ed thing, so the school psychologist isn't required to be there. Sometimes they have information that might be helpful, but they're not a part of that team typically.
Yeah, and being in the meetings, being in the two different meetings, they're run very differently.
Very different.
Very different. Can you kind of talk about how an IEP meeting is kind of run versus a 504?
Yeah.
Like I know who's in the room, but like how does it, because I feel like I've been in both and they're very different.
So an IEP meeting is a lot more involved in that there are a lot more components that the team has to discuss, including present levels of academic performance and functional performance. You're looking at having annual goals. You're looking at services, accommodations. You've got your extended school year determination, how they participate in state assessments or district assessments.
You're looking at the level of service that a student needs, which we'll talk about, I think, a little bit later. We call LRE, the least restrictive environment. So you're looking at that.
And then with 504s, you're looking at accommodations. You've got your service providers who will make sure that those accommodations are being done and the person responsible for it being implemented. So it's a little less in depth. 504s are a little less in depth, but just as important.
Based on what the individual student needs and after you guys have determined that. Okay, awesome. What else? How else are they different?
So states receive funding for students with IEPs, whereas states do not receive extra funding for students on 504 plans. However, the caveat to that is that the federal government can take away funding from programs that don't meet their legal duty to serve kids with disabilities. So it's one of those things that we have to make sure that we're really being on top of, making sure that our students are getting what they need and getting their accommodations and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. That was great. I know it's a big question and a loaded question, but it's a great summary of just the differences between that IEP and that 504 for teachers. So you did mention just really quickly the LRE, and that's least restrictive environment, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the burning question number 2 is, what is it? What does it really mean?
It's a loaded question. All the questions are loaded questions, but they're good ones.
Yeah, so it means that the child with a disability must be educated within the same classroom as typically mainstreamed non-disabled peers to the fullest extent possible in order to ensure that the disabled child is receiving what we call FAPE, which stands for Free Appropriate Public Education. The trick with it is it's not a place, it's a principle that guides the program for a child's education. And it can look different for every student because, as we've talked about a couple of times already, each student is unique, each case is unique. And so you really have to take into consideration the individual when you're looking at what is LRE that we're going to be able to offer.
I think a lot of times LRE takes some out of the box thinking because not everything fits in a specific box. And so being able to think creatively about how we can best support students and what they need within their environment to access the curriculum is so important.
So there's different ways and different scenarios that we might have. There's always gen ed with support services. You can have partial gen ed with some pull-out services. Typically that looks like resource within our elementary settings. Specialized programming, and that varies from district to district. In our district, we have our skills programs, we have our SPICE programs, ESAP, and resource,
and we have different variations of like a resource type setting too within the secondary realm. We've got what's called co-teaching, which is a general education teacher and a special education teacher in the same classroom, providing support to all the students, not only just students with special education needs, but to also the general education population within that classroom. They have advisory periods in our school district. They have so many different ways to meet different needs. So there are just so many options of LRE. It's not really one specific destination. Right. It's really it's an ebb and flow, I feel like, because LRE one year might look one way for a student and it might look completely different the next year depending on how they progress and their needs.
Okay, and Jen, you just said like a bunch of things. You said SPICE and resource. What was the other one you said? Skills. Can you just quickly, what are the differences for teachers between a SPICE, a resource, and a skills classroom for those kiddos?
And there are layers within each of those programs as well. So it makes it tricky. But so I'll start with SPICE. Do you want us to talk about skills a little bit? SPICE, we have SPICE 1 and we have SPICE 2. SPICE 1 is our program that is a bit more structured and has systems in place to be working specifically on social skills, what we call discrete trial training, which is really continuously reinforced instruction to help students gain mastery of beginning level skills and more advanced as you go along. The settings tend to be a little bit smaller and pretty particular about the schedules that they follow in order to help students kind of to be able to regulate and access their learning. A lot of times that's our SPICE 1. Typically students with autism are within those programs, but none of our programs are exclusive to an eligibility determination.
Okay.
Very often, so a student that receives an eligibility of autism doesn't automatically go into a SPICE setting. That's
right.
Kind of what we were referencing a little bit earlier, is that you really have to look at what are those systems, what are those things that a student needs in order to access their learning. We look at those things first before we even look at, okay, what kind of programming would that maybe be then?
Okay.
Because it can be very easy to do that in reverse, and it can cloud some of the decisions that teams are able to make. So, but going back to what we were saying, that's SPICE 1, SPICE 2, at least within the within the elementary setting, students are integrated within the gen ed setting, and they're accessing a lot of gen ed curriculum. Sometimes they need additional supports in a smaller environment to be able to do that, or they need more explicit instruction with social skills, executive functioning, really just need that schedule to help them regulate to be able to access their learning, but they may be working at a more independent level, a little higher language skills. And so those might be our SPICE 2 students. Again, that typically do our students with autism, but not exclusive to students with autism.
Skills programs. So we have different levels of skills. We've got our academic skills, we've got CD skills, we've got Life MD skills, and functional skills. So we've got a lot of different programs under that umbrella, which is amazing because it serves a lot of different needs. So we've got our academic skills, which is really more of a focus on the academic piece. Typically, students in academic skills need most, if not all, of their academic instruction modified, taught by a special education teacher. Not always. So beauty in secondary land is that we have a lot of different programming options on our campuses that allows students to kind of get different needs met within different programs.
Yeah.
CD skills is exclusive to elementary. I'll let Jen kind of chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that CD stands for communication delay, and those classrooms are set up to support significant language needs. Students are accessing general education curriculum, but really that language piece is what's impeding their access to their learning. And so there's a heavy focus on addressing those needs. So, and within our specialized programs, our related service providers very often are pushing into those classrooms to be able to provide those supports. So there's, in this particular case with communication delay, there's a heavy collaboration between that speech team and the teaching team.
And then we have our functional skills and Life MD skills, and those are pretty similar in that, again, you have students who require most, if not all, of their core academic instruction taught by a special education teacher, most of it being very, very functional based. So like, for example, if you're working in mathematics, you're working on how they can functionally use math in an everyday setting. So using money, how to go to the grocery store and plan for a budget and those kinds of things. Life MD, you might see some kiddos with some medical type of needs who may need some tube feedings or things along those lines. Typically, their communication is completely adapted, so they typically completely adapted, not all, but they'll use things like switches or their AAC device to be able to communicate their wants and needs. And really the overall focus is to help it and support those students access the community, access their learning based on what their needs are.
Okay, awesome. And then resource, and does that differ significantly from then the SPICE and the skills?
Resource is the word is escaping me right now, but is an intervention program. It's not a replacement program for instruction, whereas very often within our specialized program,
it's more of a,
teachers may be the core teachers. So
got it.
There's definitely a lot of partnership between Gen Ed and Resource in order to address what student needs are, but it is intervention based and typically pull out, but not limited to pull out. It just depends on, what your staffing situation is and how you're able to address needs. So you get pretty creative.
And it definitely looks different in secondary too when we move from elementary to junior high and high school, where we have some special education teachers teaching an English or math content area. They're using the Gen Ed curriculum. It's just at a slower pace, a lot more reteaching going on of the Gen Ed curriculum. So they're still using Gen Ed curriculum just at a pace that kind of meets their needs. We also have a model co-teaching, which again kind of goes back to that general ed teacher and the special ed teacher in the same room teaching gen ed content at the same pace and rigor that a gen ed class typically would run. So getting kids who just need that extra bit of support and reteaching within the classroom what they need. So it does look different from school to school and elementary to secondary.
Right. And there are sometimes once a team identifies what the needs of a student are, and we're looking at all of our programs, there are times where we actually have to look outside of district as well. And so when we're looking at IEPs, that typically they'll have different coding for what the LRE is, the least restrictive environment. A, if it's on an IEP, is they're in the gen ed classroom 80% or more of the day. If it's B, it's 79 to 40% of the day they're in gen ed. C is less than 40%. And then D is not with gen ed. They are in a placement outside of district that allows them to have access to their gen ed peers. It's not as common of a conversation, but it does happen. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's good that there's that protocol in place. Like what percentage can this, because the goal, right, would have them in the least restrictive environment as much as possible. But it's good that you guys have that. And I know that was totally off the cuff, but yeah, you hear these terms, SPICE 1, SPICE 2, skills, and you hear the terms as a gen ed teacher and you're like, I don't really know necessarily what all of those do or what they are. So I just thought it was good maybe overall, but honestly, you sound very busy.
Very busy all the time.
We are not bored.
I'm like, man, you're stressing me out. And so then I'm like, oh man, okay. So this next question's coming like at a perfect time after this conversation. So how is the district handling these special ed teacher shortages? Because it sounds like we need like an army of you people out there to really provide all of these awesome supports to our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sadly, it's not just something that is happening here in Arizona. It really is
right
across the nation. We're dealing with not only special ed teacher shortages, but also gen ed teacher shortages and just shortages everywhere in general.
Yeah, it's awful. Yeah.
We've, as a district, I think, done a really good job of creatively problem solving some of these needs. And as far as, addressing them, I know the district has offered hard to fill stipends. They've increased teacher salaries. We work with vendor agencies. We are able to look at the option to partner with universities for those that are coming out of a teacher program.
We have the program that we've just started this year with Pathways for those individuals that have bachelor's degrees, didn't necessarily go into teaching initially, but really wanted to move into the field of teaching. And so we have a program in-house as well. This year we've started with elementary gen ed teachers and then special ed K-12. And we have, I want to say it's 30 teachers or roughly there. I know it's
somewhere around there.
Yeah, roughly. I think it's around 33, 34. I mean, a good sized group of teachers. Yeah.
Yeah. So the term that sometimes gets used is TAR, which is a teacher in residence. There's universities as well that still do that program, and we may have TARs, but Pathways is our way of having that in-house and really being able to
grow our people.
Yeah, and have it be reflective of what they're doing in their jobs too, because we know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So we kind of have a bird's eye view. Next year, the look is to add secondary gen ed and then also continue with special ed. So
yeah, and if we can cultivate that GPS pathway culture, as they're learning and growing, and also kind of boots on the ground, right? We can keep that going with the supports. Hopefully, that will help with these shortages. Yeah,
and I think too, just one thing that I didn't address on here as we were kind of looking through some of these questions is our coaches, our instructional coaches, and our special education coaches. I mean, they are absolutely amazing and have done such an amazing job with supporting teachers during this time
100%.
Because people are in a place of just survival, which is extremely challenging when you're trying to address so many different needs within the classroom. And our coaches have really stepped up, instructional coaches, professional growth department, just being able to help and support teachers getting their needs met, to be able to then support their students and supporting them that way. So super grateful for all of our coaches.
Yeah. Some of them.
Yeah, me too. They're awesome.
We would be sunk without them.
Yes, true.
I mean, I might be a little biased, okay, but I do think that they're out there and they're doing a great job and the best that they can to support what's going on in education in our district right now, for sure. So, what do you feel like? I know this is one of the other burning questions teachers asked. What has been COVID's impact from a special education perspective?
Oh, well, I would say one of the big ones for sure would be social emotional learning and the need to address that across the board. There were pockets where we were needing to address that prior, but there really has been a need to hone in on that because it's just been such a comprehensive need.
Mm-hmm.
Not only special ed, but also the general ed population as well.
Yes.
Right. And with that, I mean, just giving those social interactions back to students too. We've noticed students that may be coming in with less interventions, if not any, before starting school, just because the opportunities weren't there. And,
Right.
people having to make decisions about things with their health, and rightfully so. So that's just, you're dealing with some variables that we've been able to provide solutions for prior to COVID, and we have those now, but now there's just a weighing of those options, and so they're coming in with different skill sets and maybe greater need than there might have been.
Yeah.
There's been, I mean, especially in secondary, I see a lot of students struggling with unhealthy, probably not the best coping mechanisms when they have anxiety or, feeling stressed and things like that. So being able to really get back to helping and supporting kids understand how to appropriately respond to those kinds of big feelings that maybe during the pandemic they weren't responding to. And so now we're having to backtrack and learn all those things again, which is, you see it all over the news. We want to make sure that our kids are learning healthy ways to be able to communicate and help solve their problems and things of that nature.
There have been some exciting things though too. Like there have been some harder things, but I think COVID forced us to come up with new ways to reach kids that we maybe hadn't explored before. A lot of that being technology based, but we really had to think outside the box. And so that's been exciting because teachers, you would see some get excited and keep incorporating some of those strategies that they might have been using when we were not in school. Families have a new way to interact. I think relationships opened up a little bit with families because we had more access to each other. So that was good. That's been a positive change.
And just the emphasis on trauma-informed care, really getting to the root of some of these concerns. I mean, our kids and our families have faced things that, either sometimes we do know about and sometimes we don't. And so really being able to kind of dig deep and provide them with the resources that they need in order to kind of deal with the challenges that they're facing in their own lives.
Yeah. I mean, I'm listening to you guys and I'm just thinking my son was 2 or 3 when the pandemic started, right? And so we just didn't go out to eat, right? Nobody was leaving their house. And the other day we went to a restaurant for the first time, I feel like in forever. And I realized he didn't have the restaurant skills, appropriate restaurant behavior that my daughter has because she's 10 right now and he's now 6. And I'm like, oh yeah, you've had 3 years of just kind of being at home and eating at home. And I really haven't gone over hey, we need to have an inside voice while we eat. And going into kindergarten, his teacher is so funny. She's like, he narrates everything he does. And I'm like, And she's like, yeah, he'll be like, and now I'm going to put my paper away. And now I'm going to get my pencil. And it's just so funny because it's just he hadn't been around kids, and I think he just picked up this whole talking to himself, and I think so that social emotional, that socialization, just being hyper aware of who you are around people, and how there's certain behaviors that you need in order to function in society. I mean, yeah, it just is really, it's impacted. I mean, I loved that I got to spend so much time with him during that time because he was so little, but now I'm starting to look at things oh yeah, I really didn't teach you that. We didn't go over that because we just weren't out. So.
Right.
And it's not something that you would typically, I think parents sometimes forget, we don't typically do that all the time in the home setting, whereas they do it all the time in the school setting. So having that lack of exposure is just kind of showing folks, I forgot that we had to do this X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. But yeah, that's definitely something that we...
By the end of COVID, I was like, here's your Lunchable. Please stop talking to me. So I was like, okay, I can't be making all these meals and all this stuff all the time. I mean, that's just a mom confession, but I think you're right. I think it definitely has been great, but then there's been some definite challenges for sure.
And I think it's a global challenge too. So while we see it a lot in special education, it's not exclusive to special education by any stretch.
Right. We're all feeling it. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So the last thing I want to ask you, those are the top questions, the frequently asked questions that you guys get from teachers. But really at the end of the day, from your perspective, looking at that bird's eye view, and you guys also have both been in the trenches of special education and working with general education teachers, what are like 3 ways that, like, after listening to this podcast, a general education teacher can walk away and be like, okay, I can do these 3 things to really support my kiddos with disabilities?
Only 3, huh?
Well, I mean, okay. So if you have more, that's fine. But like, I feel like 3 is a number I can remember tomorrow.
I think the first, the biggest thing that any gen ed teacher should do is being able to identify any students with an IEP or 504, making sure that they've read the documents. So just those simple things of being able to identify, make sure you know the plan and know who to contact as far as, working in collaboration with those team members if the student's on an IEP or a 504. So being able to understand what that document is and implement what's listed in the document.
And know that,
okay.
And I would second especially the collaboration piece too, because you don't have to do the things alone, no should you, because the team is really going to be the supports and the springboard for addressing student needs. And so just knowing that you're not alone, you don't have to be, nor is it just a SPED special education teacher role to meet the needs, it's everybody's role. And so knowing that you have a team, I think is helpful. And it's a little bit less intimidating because, if you haven't had a whole ton of experience or training with special education, it can be kind of daunting to know even how to begin to address needs that can be pretty significant. And so just knowing who your people are that you'll be working with is instrumental, because they want to collaborate. Everybody wants to collaborate and just make it good.
And the biggest piece for me is just access, that all students have the right to FAPE, free appropriate public education, and entitled to the same educational experiences at their least restrictive within their least restrictive environment. So just making sure that all students are given the opportunity to fully participate to the greatest extent possible. Just making sure they have that open mindset of understanding that, yes, they may have specific needs that need to be addressed, and they may have some supports and services, but having an open mind and saying, they are my kid. We are going to work as a team together, and just giving them all the access that they can.
That was really very well summarized. And I agree with all of what you're saying. And I think one of the main things that I took away from just some of my own learning is that what's good for any student with special education needs or with learning disability, whatever, is good for all kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good team.
Okay. All right. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Ready for rapid fire.
I think so.
Let's do this. Let's do this.
Stretch out, okay. Deep breaths. Okay, no, they're not that hard. They're not that hard. Okay. So I'm going to do a fill in the blank, and then you guys can kind of answer. Do you want to just Courtney answer, Jen answer? Does that work?
Sure. That works.
Okay. All right. Let's do that. So special education is
collaborative.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
A journey, not a destination.
Oh, a journey, not a destination. Yeah, it is, because as we've been talking about a lot, you got to collaborate with that team, but it's also figuring out going on that journey with that kid. I love that. Okay. Who or what inspires you?
So I see so many secondary students that when the impossible becomes reality, just that look on their face and knowing that they can do something that maybe they were once told they couldn't, that inspires me more than anything. Yeah. Being able to see kids accomplish something they didn't think that they ever could.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'd have to agree with that. There's a lot of things. That's hard to narrow down. My kids do. They make me want to be better. I love watching people help people. Even in the, whether it's at campuses, it's students helping students, just people meeting people where they're at, and just, I don't know, there's something about that is inspiring to me, because it gives me hope, I guess is probably what that is. And then coming back to the thing that I always come back to, I love a good book, and I love something. Stop it.
I love it.
But one that challenges my thinking and just makes me take a different perspective and keep growing, because I'm always thinking.
Work in progress.
Yeah,
for sure.
I just really like that.
Yeah, now I'm going to be thinking about people helping people all day. I like that. Okay. All right. So here we go. What is one piece of teaching advice that is either so bad you have to warn us, or so amazing you have to tell us?
Oh boy. Well, I'm going to stick with always have a plan, but be willing to throw the plan out the window. Because as a teacher, as a special education teacher, and I feel like in any aspect of life, things are always going to be thrown your way, and you have to be okay with being flexible and change, because change is constant. That's the only thing that's, happening within the day, I feel like. So being able to have that plan's great, being able to have that lesson plan ready to go, but sometimes it's important to address a certain need and it goes another way. So be willing to also be flexible with that plan.
Great. All right, Jen.
All right. There's a few, but one that I would say is to let your students see you make mistakes and how you handle it. Because they need to feel that freedom to be able to make mistakes, because they will in your classroom, and to know that they can recover from it and there's learning to come from it. It's
Productive
not
struggle.
Yeah, it's not a final analysis of their personhood. I just talking through, oh my gosh, look what I did. When I would teach, I gave them plenty of opportunity to say that. But we talked about it, and I felt like that was important. So
it is important, because sometimes I think they see teachers as like, you're a teacher, you know everything, you've been trained in this. Yeah, no, I'm human, and I also mess up quite a bit. But here's how we're going to make this work today.
Yeah,
right.
So
yeah,
right, yeah. Okay, what are your must-have smartphone apps?
Well, can't live without the Duo app, because this is the Duo app. Otherwise, I can't get onto my computer or log into the GPS portal. So definitely my Duo app.
Oh my gosh, Courtney, yes.
I live with the Starbucks, the Netflix, Hulu, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I'm a huge social media junkie. I'm always scrolling on something and sending people funny TikTok videos. So
yes, she does.
I do.
Hey, put me on your list of things to send to, because I love all those too.
Perfect. You'll be my next victim to send all these TikTok videos to. I love them. That's just.
Yeah, I don't think Wendy and Julia love them as much as I do. So you and I, Courtney, we'll be like, this one's great.
Perfect. I love that.
For me, I would say Dutch Bros.
Oh, wait. So wait, is there a Starbucks Dutch Bros like rivalry happening?
I don't think so. No, it's just more, I go there more because they have two real close to my house.
Yeah, and I've got one super close to my house. I do love Dutch Bros because I used to live in Oregon prior, and that was being in Oregon, Dutch Bros. So
okay, I just had to know, like, if there was like a thing, like, no, I only.
Okay. It's whatever's closest and whoever knows where.
Whoever happens to be driving by it.
Yeah, I'm. You know what? If you bring me coffee from wherever it is, I will love you forever. So yes, I'm like that too. Okay.
Just staying with my theme, Audible or Libby. I've recently discovered I don't have to buy all the books. I can actually.
Yes.
And so that's been a good thing. Because I'm a mom of drivers, Life 360 is a big one. Hulu, Facebook, and naturally Amazon.
Oh, Amazon. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm always.
Amazon, I feel like, runs my life.
It's a problem.
It's a problem, but like I can't stop.
Like, it gets there so fast.
I know.
They've
makes it so easy.
Sometimes it's like that day.
And they've spoiled me for every single other thing I buy from anywhere else. I'm like, what do you mean 7 business days? Like,
and I have to pay for shipping.
$24.99 for expedited shipping? No, thank you.
Right, I know. So now we're just like we're Amazon junk. I'm like, if they don't have it on Amazon, I'm not buying it. Like, that's where I'm at. Okay, last one. What song do you know all the lyrics to, and you do not have to sing it?
Oh, thank the Lord Jesus. So it is my go-to karaoke song. It's the song anytime someone says, sing a song that you know, My Heart Will Go On by Celine Dion. I mean, if anybody has seen Titanic, they know that song, and it is just, it is my go-to karaoke song. I love Celine.
I lived for my Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet Titanic poster in my room. So I'm with you. I'm with you there.
I think I have a few, but I'll just give you one because I'm a child of the 80s, and I used to be pretty heavy into dance. And so Thriller is my, especially the Vincent Price part, that's my favorite part. But
Let's see
Jen,
it.
can you dance?
Let's record it.
Actually, a little side story. Yes, I can. When I was working at Canyon Rim, we would go to science camp, and one of the things that I was in charge of was teaching some dance moves, and so that was one that we did sometimes. We didn't do the whole thing because time didn't allow for it, and it was a voluntary thing because not everybody is into that kind of.
I will find a video and send it to you somehow, some way.
It doesn't exist. I have scrubbed it all.
Man, I feel like because Halloween's coming up, this is our next TikTok.
Oh,
We
gosh.
have to figure that
Oh,
out.
gosh.
Yes.
Jen's like, why did I come on this podcast with you
And you
people?
are welcome to perform.
Okay, ladies, thank you so much for coming on today and just going through these questions and helping more teachers just really understand all the nuances of special education, because there are just so many. And I think this is going to be a really great summary of like a nice snapshot of what really goes on within the special education department, with the coordinators, and then also with those kiddos in their classrooms. So I really appreciate you guys coming on today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having
Yeah,
us.
thanks for the opportunity, Britt. We do appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Learning Unlocked and finding out more about special education. If you have listened today as a GPS educator, you can receive PD recertification credit by visiting the Employee Hub page through the GPS portal and navigating to professional growth, and then selecting PGD's podcast Google site. Just a reminder that we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GPS Prof Growth. That's at GPS PROF GROWTH. For more information or resources from this episode, please visit our website at learningunlocked.libsyn.com/website. We are distributed by Libsyn to Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Audible. Episodes are also available on our PGD YouTube channel under playlists. Our intro and outro music are licensed from Melody Loops. Thanks again, Keyholders. Keep unlocking curiosity, creativity, and innovation with your students. Stay kind and courageous, and I'll see you next time.